Welcome to episode 36 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on June 25th, 2020. Today I am going to talk a lot about wool, which you might find odd if you're in the Northern Hemisphere at the end of June, but I hope it will make sense in a bit. I'll play some extra summery tunes for you to neutralize all the woolly thoughts. Let us begin. Thank you to Sarah and Leslie for coming on board as patrons of the podcast over at patreon.com/IthoughtIknewHow. Patrons help with the running of the podcast and receive some benefits in return. If you'd like to look into that more, you can hop over to patreon.com/IthoughtIknewHow and see if it makes sense for you. I am very grateful to all my patrons. And of course, patrons at the ribbing level and higher are invited to join us on the second and fourth Tuesdays from 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time for some online knitting. And all of you are welcome to join in on the first Tuesday. Check out the I Thought I Knew How Facebook group for the first Tuesday link, and patrons check the Patreon feed for the patron knit-togethers. Our next knit-together is open to all and will be July 7th. Patrons, you should have received an email from Patreon. They're going to start taxing some donations. It depends on your state or country, and it depends on the benefits of your given level. Unfortunately, I don't know how all those variables are going to affect you personally, but I do know that it will start on July 1st, and if you need to modify your pledge level, I completely understand. Also, I'd like to say a quick thank you to those who took the time to rate the podcast on iTunes over the last couple of weeks. Rating and sharing episodes with friends is a great way to support the podcast by making it more visible for those who may enjoy it. So thank you for taking the time. Okay, I'm sure you're all wondering how things have been going with the Master Hand Knitting program over the last couple of weeks, and I am unashamedly reporting that nothing happened. And that's okay. It was just one of those times when I couldn't fit it into life, but that was an anomaly at this point. I should have more to report next time. Last week, we went on a road trip, and that ate into my ability to sit and focus on the program, but it was an 8-hour trip each way, so I got a lot of work done on projects. I started and nearly finished a giant shawl that I'll talk about later, and I finished my second Katie's Kep. The second one was knit using a natural shade of Morehouse Farm 2-ply sport for the background and one hank of their new hand paint 2-ply sport for all the pattern stitches. Using a hand paint for the pattern stitches creates a pseudo Fair Isle look because the colors change without you having to deal with multiple skeins of yarn. The crown on the Katie's Kep continues to amaze me. I just love the resulting star. This makes 3 of the Shetland Wool Week hats that I am in love with, mainly because of the crowns. The Crofthouse by Ella Gordon has a gorgeous crown that makes me think of a spider web, and Shwook by Hazel Tindall has a daisy-like crown. Katie's Kep is topped with a bold 6-pointed star with additional detailing between the points of the star, and I find it mesmerizing. Our road trip took us to the area of the country where Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania meet. The Ohio River starts in Pennsylvania and then forms the border of Ohio and West Virginia. And in that area, my grandparents and 3 generations back from them all lived right there. East Liverpool was the pottery capital of the United States and was shipping products around the world. It still does, really. If you're familiar with Fiesta ware, that's still made in a factory there on the West Virginia side. East Liverpool, Ohio has a small museum in an old post office building dedicated to the history of the potteries in the area. My ancestors had come over from Wales, the north of England, and Sweden, and settled there to work in the potteries as potters and painters. Family history research is another hobby of mine, and I had hoped to maybe spot a name or some other connection to help connect a relative with which of the 100+ potteries that had operated in the area, but that was not to be. They were not in upper management, so I knew the chances of that were slim, but it was an interesting trip and a good way to get out of the house and still stay socially distanced. Not many people visit museums dedicated to former local industries on a good day, let alone during a pandemic. I thought about looking for a yarn shop or 2 along the trail, but decided not to bother. My yarn stash needs no augmentation at the moment. We did do a couple of side trips on the way home, though. One took us to Keystone Safari, which is a small privately run zoo. There was a camelid enclosure with a young camel that came over for pats. and I was very happy to oblige. He had the softest fur, and now I want to find myself some camel yarn to try out. So if anyone has a trusted source for that, please let me know. On our other excursion, we hopped over to Punxsutawney to visit the weather forecasting groundhog. The Groundhog Day event actually takes place just outside of town in a little wooded area, but the rest of the year, Punxsutawney Phil and his companion live in an enclosure at the public library that has a large window to the outside, so we were able to visit them without going inside. Punxsutawney was a nice little side trip that took us through a bit of Amish country, which my husband hadn't experienced before. We went through one community just as school was getting out, so we saw a string of moms driving their child home in their horse-drawn buggies. We also caught sight of some sheep, and at that point I did keep my eyes out for any signs about local wool for sale, but we only saw one arrow pointing down a side road for some quilts. So yeah, no work on the Master Hand Knitter program. I was too busy being not in my house and pretending that life was normal while also wearing a mask and staying several feet away from strangers at all times as I pet exotic animals and read up on historical pottery. Let's take a break before we get too much further. I have a poppy rock summer song for you today from Louis Yolin and Stefan Latronic. This is Keep Dreaming.
You're a liar, you're a cheat, you're a dirty little thief, and you're everything I wish I was and more. And you'll steal all my heart, then you'll break it all apart, just to watch me pick the pieces off the floor. And I know you'll seem alright, but it eats you up inside. Just like glass on the wall, you can shine so bright, then shatter when it all seems right. Just like glass on the wall, I can see right through, so clear I see the real you. And whoa, just like glass. You're on top all the while, I can see that funny smile. Watch you change direction when you shut the door. You can run, you can hide, all your days with foolish pride. Yeah, it's coming around to give you what's in store. And they love those pretty eyes, but I see the tears behind. Just like glass on the wall, you can shine so bright, then shatter when it all seems right. Just like glass on the wall, I can see right through, so clear I see the real you. And whoa, all this time you've been so hollow, just insecure with your emotions. All this time I see right through, when all I want's a miracle of your reflection. Just like glass on the wall, you can shine so bright, then shatter when it all seems right. Just like glass on the wall, I can see right through, so clear I see the real you. Just like glass on the wall, you can shine so bright, then shatter when it all seems right. Just like glass on the wall, I can see right through, so clear I see the real you. And whoa, just like
It is summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and everyone is talking about plant-based yarns, and that's fine. Every now and then I like to knit something with cotton or linen, but I'd be lying if I said I loved it. It's fine. But it's rare to find a cotton or linen that is actually a pleasure to use. They are so unforgiving and tough that they tend to cut into your finger. Okay, maybe not cut into, but it's not unheard of for knitters using plant fibers to develop a groove over their finger. There is so little give. Sometimes you'll find a soft, lofty, organic cotton to use, but the trade-off for comfort while working with that is that cotton tends to sort of mash together as it's worn and laundered, and knit cotton tends to grow wider and shorter with time, so you have to take that into account. I mean, it's fine for what it is, but it's not a joy for me to work with. This was driven home for me a few weeks ago. I'd been crocheting a bunch of produce bags using some random linen in my stash. Now, linen will actually soften up brilliantly over time. I will make an exception for my lack of love for plant fibers for linen. But that said, working with linen is generally no fun at all. The end result, once washed and blocked, is amazing and worth it, but I do not enjoy it at the time. Anyway, I got 5 of these produce bags made up and then went back to knitting the Hazel shawl in Jamieson and Smith Shetland wool, which I will admit is not the softest wool to work with as you're knitting with it, though I love it when it's been blocked. But the contrast between crocheting with the linen and knitting with the Jamieson and Smith was like switching from dental floss to pillows. I know that makes no sense. But it felt so nice to be back to knitting with wool again. So nice. So I want to make the case for wool, even in warm weather. And I will say that my case is made from personal experience, from a video called Wool 101 on YouTube that I will link to, and from a series of prints recently produced by Terry Laura Malcolmson and Julie Dennison. If you saw the Morehouse Open Farm Day event, I touched on a lot of this information there, but I want to make the case directly to you, my listeners, about why wool can be so wonderful, even in summer. First, some information that doesn't have anything to do with the weather. Wool is earth-friendly. It's a byproduct of the meat industry and should be viewed in the spirit of using the whole buffalo. There are a lot of people in the world who need to be fed, and sheep can be raised in land that cannot otherwise be used for agricultural purposes. And those sheep cannot be left to grow their fleeces nonstop. The fleeces must be removed to prevent life-threatening conditions like fly strike and for the mechanics of movement for the sheep. An unshorn sheep that falls can find itself unable to get up again. What an awful way to go. Shearing does not injure the sheep. I've seen many demonstrations of shearing, and while it's true that sometimes there is a sheep now and then that does not enjoy its haircut, the same can be said for a 4-year-old human. It's something that is over and done with quickly, and many sheep go into a zen-like state as it's happening and come out of it behaving more sprightly, having lost several pounds in just a few moments. Despite what yarn prices might make people believe, farmers are not becoming millionaires through selling their flocks' fleeces. Once the shearers are paid, most wool producers, apart from a few specific breeds, are lucky to make $1 or $2 off each fleece. The wool itself is a sustainable product that is produced yearly, but it also biodegrades quickly in the right conditions. When exposed to the water and bacteria and soil, a wool garment can biodegrade completely in a matter of months, and in the process of biodegrading, it returns nutrients to the soil. In fact, some wool producers, annoyed by the low prices they are being offered for their fleeces, will turn to composting it and using it as fertilizer for other ventures that they have. But in use, the wool is a magnificent enigma. There are several instances where it behaves in 2 opposing ways. For instance, wool will keep you warm, so people tend to think of it as an insulator. However, it's more accurate to describe wool as a temperature regulator, because wool also has the ability to keep you cool. When you start to warm up, your body produces sweat. But before the sweat can even condense into a layer of moisture on your skin, the wool will pick it up and begin transferring it along the length of the wool fiber. Once it reaches the outside air, it will evaporate away. And if you think back to high school science, that act of evaporation requires energy, in this case heat. That loss of heat at the one end of the wool is transferred back to you and keeps you cooler. The trick to this in the summer is to wear a thin enough layer of wool that the transfer happens quickly enough to keep you cool. So tops knit out of lace weight, for instance, or even a lace shawl worn around your shoulders as a shawl rather than like bunched up over your shoulders like a cowl should be fine. Do keep in mind that if you're going to be in the sun, darker colors will still warm up faster than lighter colors. So if you intend to knit yourself a summer top out of wool, think white and pastels. Wool will repel water and likewise many water-based stains. If you spill something on a bit of wool, you can often shake it off before it penetrates. Even if it does begin to soak in, running water through it from the backside may be all it takes to rinse it out. That said, we all know that water will penetrate wool if given the chance. That's the whole point of wet blocking. But because of the structure of the wool fiber itself, it will continue to function as a temperature regulator even when it's wet, keeping you warm to a certain point before maintaining that temperature level. The wool itself tends to be physically lighter than plant fibers for the same amount of coverage, and it allows more air to pass through. Even if you do outstrip the wool's ability to keep you cool, maybe you're wearing something a little too thick or a little too dark, you don't need to worry about odor. Wool is naturally antibacterial, so the little biddies that like to dine on your sweat don't get a chance to sidle up to the table as readily as with a cotton shirt. That said, any odors that the wool does pick up are only temporary. An airing in a well-ventilated space is usually all that's needed to return the garment to neutral. Considering some of its more scientific aspects, wool is flame resistant. It will burn if exposed to a flame, but it tends to smolder and then go out if the flame is removed. The reason for this is that wool requires more oxygen to burn than what is available in the ambient atmosphere. So thinking about bedding and pajamas for children, which in the United States are legally required to be flame retardant, wool is a genius alternative to the typical materials that these are made out of these days. It feels better against the skin, and it's free of chemicals that might be irritating to sensitive young skin. Finally, and this is perhaps the coolest thing I have learned about wool, it will actually filter the air in an enclosed area like your home and can provide that service for up to 30 years. The way this works is that the wool fiber has elements to it that are acidic and that are alkali. When a pollutant comes in contact with the wool fiber, acidic pollutants are broken down by the alkali elements of the wool, and alkali pollutants are broken down by the acidic elements of the wool. There are companies that make wool carpeting, which stands up beautifully over time, but we have in our bedroom a wool area rug that we purchased from a discount retailer. We also have a wool pillow made from woven wool and have switched to using a wool duvet. All three of these items help to keep the interior of our home that much cleaner. And now that I know that this is a thing, my plan is that as things wear out, we will replace them with wool alternatives where possible. Many of these qualities are not things that science has been able to replicate. For instance, the anti-stinky capabilities of wool. There are shirts made of synthetic fibers that claim to be antibacterial, but they lose that quality after a few wears. Activewear shirts that claim to wick sweat away from the body don't begin to function until there's a layer of moisture on your skin, and then they tend to be designed to absorb the sweat by relying on water's tendency to fill spaces. So the synthetic fibers have grooves and channels in them. The problem with that method, though, is once the sweat is in those spaces, it's where it wants to be. So the evaporation is much slower than the transport method inherent in wool, and you end up walking around in wet clothing that's absorbing more and more sweat. And of course, bacteria love that environment, so you're risking skin infections and odor issues. Wool is wonderful. If you would like to take a deeper dive, take a look at the Wool 101 lecture linked in the show notes. If you would like to sing the praises of this magnificent fiber and spread the word, take a look at terrylora.co.uk. Terry and Julie's collaboration on the wonders of wool began as a 12-post series on Instagram and is now available as an art print with all the illustrations on one frameable page, as well as mugs, tea towels, postcards, and more. I put in an order myself for the art print and one of the mugs, and I'm looking forward to their arrival so I can do my bit to let people know just how wonderful a product wool is year-round. Again, check the show notes in your podcast app or by visiting ithoughtIknewhow.familypodcasts.com and opening the link for episode 36. All that talk about wool, so let's talk about Allbirds shoes again. You know now why wool would make such a wonderful material for shoes. The Allbirds wool runners I bought are so comfy. The super soft merino inner lining feels like my foot is swathed in fleece. They are so smooth that I don't need to wear socks, and that's okay because not only is the wool antibacterial and odor resistant, these shoes are machine washable. My daughter bought her pair for that very reason. She has spent enough time walking around in cities to know that machine washable shoes are genius. Everything in their entire line is either from sustainable or recycled materials, and they don't just carry shoes. They have socks as well. And just since the last episode, they announced that they now have a line of undies for men and women made from a blend of merino, cellulose, and spandex. I love when quality products that make sense for the environment also come with a manageable price tag. My wool runners cost me $20 less than the sneakers I was wearing before. But they don't just make sneakers, and they don't just use wool. There are ballet flats, high tops, and loungers as well, and many styles are also available in their eucalyptus fiber. Check them out for yourself at tinyurl.com/allbirdsshoes. And if you decide to buy, you'll be helping to support the show. That's tinyurl.com/allbirdsshoes. Brown Sheep sent me 4 skeins of their nature spun worsted to try out and share my opinion with you. And I thought this was the perfect opportunity to take on a project I've been wanting to do for years now, which was to recreate a granny square shawl that my mother had made for herself in the 70s. I have used Brown Sheep yarns in the past. I am a big fan of their cotton fleece yarn, and I've done a review of their Stratosphere, which is their superwash worsted spun. The Nature Spun is their woolen spun wool yarn, which comes in fingering, sport, and worsted weights in a massive number of colors. Looking at the 2018 catalog, I counted 82 colors. I'm not sure if they're all still in their line or not. Brown Sheep is an American-owned mill that has been operating for 40 years now. They have an innovative system in place that allows them to recycle their dye water, and one of the chemicals used in their dye process makes the yarn moth-proof. Moth-proof wool yarn. You don't have to worry about it. But how was the yarn? First of all, I would classify this yarn as a workhorse yarn, but what a workhorse it is. Aside from a few purposely heathered shades, the yarn colors are solid and consistent. I worked with 8 balls of yarn, and in those 8 balls, I only encountered 2 joins. I didn't encounter any issues with variations in the plying or thickness of the yarn. I encountered no vegetable matter, though there were 3 or 4 times in the 8 skeins where a bit of plastic thread had been spun into the wool. This is something you encounter from time to time with lots of yarn, though, and generally is from bits of feed sacks or old rope getting caught in the fleeces, or they can enter the supply chain through plastic packing sacks when the fleeces are transported to the mill. In every case, though, I just needed to untwist the yarn a little bit and the bits came right out without damaging the yarn. So all of that said, I don't hold that against the yarn. I just wanted to let you know to be thorough in my review. I used most of this yarn crocheting the shawl, and if you'd like to see how that turned out, hop over to my Ravelry project page or Instagram account. They're both I Thought I Knew How, and there are pictures there. I found the yarn to be very nice to work with. Some worsted weight yarns appear to be worsted weight in size, but when you start working with them, they sort of collapse in on themselves and feel more like a sport or a DK. This was a true, solid worsted weight yarn. I have 0 prickle reaction to this yarn. It fed out of the skein easily. I have no complaints about how it behaved in the crocheted shawl, and I ended up with enough of each color to knit up a quick hat to try it in a knitting project. So I knit up the basic Norwegian star hat by Cara Jo Knapp. It's a fairly straightforward Fair Isle hat that took a couple of nights to knit up. I had to be a little creative about the colors because of the amounts of what I had left, but the yarn performed beautifully in the project. It has enough grip to it to stay in place well for the color work, and I was able to knit a nice smooth fabric with it with excellent stitch definition. When I blocked the two projects, I didn't notice any color loss in the soaking water. The yarn softened up a bit once it was dry. I needed a workhorse type yarn for my swatches and projects for the Master Hand Knitter program, and I defaulted to Cascade 220, but in all honesty, I think that if I had been more familiar with the Brown Sheep Nature Spun, I would have opted to use it instead. Both are good general purpose yarns, but the Brown Sheep is a bit softer, and this may sound silly and woo-woo, but it feels like it was produced by people who actually care how it turned out. I quite like it. Let me give you some stats. I was using the worsted, so each 3.5 ounce or 100 gram ball has 245 yards or 224 meters, and it is currently priced at $11 per skein. That puts it on par price-wise, if not a little lower than similar wool yarns you'd find at a yarn store. And chances are that if you have a selection of yarn shops within driving distance, one of them will carry Brown Sheep yarns. Their website has a store locator to help you find where you can buy it locally, but if it's not available locally for you, Brown Sheep has recently started selling directly from their website. Their entire stock is now there, available for you. Check it out at brownsheep.com, and if you decide to order some Nature Spun for yourself, or really any of their yarns, enter coupon code ITIKH2020 for free shipping. That's ITIKH, all caps, for I Thought I Knew How, followed by 2020 for the year, no space, ITIKH 2020, and you'll get free shipping on your order. Thank you to Brown Sheep for sending me the yarn. It was a joy to work with, and it was the prod I needed to get to a project I've wanted to do for years now, and is bringing me a lot of happiness to have finished. Let's have a bit of music, shall we? If you tend to tune out before the final song, I'd encourage you to stick around to the end because I have some information about an upcoming knit-along coming for you. In the meantime, here's a song for those of you listening in the car as you drive through the country, maybe on a windy road through some gently rolling hills. I know that is very specific, but for the handful of you out there, you're welcome. And I'm thinking of you. This is Life Spins by Michael Bermudez.
Scarf on the floor, though I'd bet you'd barely know that the music has stopped as the doors are being locked. You bumped into my chair and dropped your shades from your hair. Then you said, yeah, oh, rock the night till the moon takes us home. Sing to me like we're all alone as life spins so slowly. Oh, rock the night till the moon takes us home. Sing to me like we're all alone as life spins so slowly. You asked my name the whole way home, held my hand as you threw my phone down the street so we could be alone, whispering for me to let it go. Then somewhere along the way, I guess the night, it became the day. I let my worries slip away, let you in just for you to say, yeah, it's got oh, rock the night till the moon takes us home. Sing to me like we're all alone as life spins so slowly. Yeah, it's got oh, rock the night till the moon takes us home. Sing to me like we're all alone as life spins so slowly. Singing.
few more things before I go. I found some really neat needles to help with weaving in ends that may be too short for a normal needle. They are called finishing needles and are available from Susan Bates. Basically, it's a pack of 5 needles to deal with various thicknesses of yarn, but each needle has an eye that goes all the way down the needle. So if you accidentally trimmed an end too close or an end has worked its way free, you can thread it through the needle very close to the point and get it woven in with no problem. I just happened to come across them on Amazon the other day. I have no idea how long these things existed. Everyone may already know about them, but I ordered them to try them out, and they've already saved me on one project. I'll throw a link in the show notes for you in case you'd like to try them out. They are only a couple bucks for 5 needles, and they're the sort of thing that you are happy to have on hand when you need them. In one of our live chats recently, Michelle mentioned a site for people who are looking for opportunities to test knit something for a designer. I had never heard about this website before, so I thought I'd pass it along. It's called yarnpond.com. If you want to be a test knitter, I am on the site right now, and it says there are 40 open calls at the moment, and there is no fee for you as a test knitter. You can look at the patterns that are available, along with the yarn requirements, expectations, and rewards before you even make an account with the site. So check that out at yarnpond.com. Finally, I would like to invite you all to a knit-along with Morehouse Farm starting on July 31st and running until August 21st. This is actually going to be the first in a series of 3 knit-alongs from the book Shawls, Wraps, and Scarves by Louisa Harding. The book is available on Amazon as a Kindle for about $12.50 or a paperback for about $18. You will need the book to get the patterns. She is not selling them individually, but if you do all 3 of the knit-alongs, the price of the book will be roughly what you'd have paid for the 3 patterns. The first knit-along will be co-hosted by me and Morehouse Farm, and we will be knitting the Lark's Alvina. It's a good, basic introduction to some of the techniques you will need for a lace knit shawl. It's very beginner friendly. For those of you who are well versed in lace, you can think of it as a bit of TV or car knitting. It's a V-shaped shawl you can wear as a cowl come winter or carry with you through the end of summer for when you step into air conditioning or use it to guard against the evening chill as the fall arrives. I'm going to be doing the prep work and testing with the Morehouse Merino lace between now and the next episode, so I would advise you to hold off on buying the yarn for the project for now until we know for sure that the yardages of the Morehouse will work for the pattern. But if you'd like to pick up the book, please use the link in the show notes to get to Amazon and make your purchase, and you'll be helping out the show. I will also be co-hosting the 3rd shawl in the series, which will happen in January and will be the Tansy shawl, which is a beaded lace capelet that is absolutely gorgeous. It is all over lace with beading throughout, but you can choose whether you want to just include beads at the bottom or at the top, or go all in like I am planning to. The 2nd shawl will be in December. I will update you in the next episode with more details, but I will tell you that this knit-along will take place in the I Thought I Knew How and Morehouse Merino Flock Facebook groups, so make sure you're a member of at least one of those groups, if not both. More complete details will be included in episode 37 on July 13th. In the meantime, go ahead and pick up the book. Again, it's called Shawls, Wraps, and Scarves by Louisa Harding, and it's available on Amazon. And if you click through to buy it using the link in the show notes, you'll be helping to support the show. Thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you'd like to support the show, please visit patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow to make a monthly pledge, or visit ko-fi.com/IThoughtIKnewHow. That's ko-fi.com/IThoughtIKnewHow to make a one-time donation to the podcast. You may also consider making a purchase from one of our sponsors on the website IThoughtIKnewHow.familypodcasts.com, where you can also find the show notes for each episode, or you can help out by leaving a 5-star review and kind comments wherever you listen to the podcast, and tell your friends. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter, where it's just Thought I Knew How. The groups on Ravelry and Facebook are both called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time.